let's get into the positives, the meh, and the negative aspects of the movie. We'll start off with what you thought that the positives were for this thing.
So I didn't expect this to I'm not an overly emotional person, but there are things that can tug at my heartstrings a little bit. And I one of the positives, I didn't expect it to do that as much as it did. And the first one is pretty early on after the scene where the Yellow Ranger meets her demise, and it does a 1 year later, which that I'm gonna throw that in May. I don't like this crazy event happens and we see none of the aftermath. It's we're already a year later. So that could have been better. But the fact that you immediately learn that Zach dropped everything, apparently he was a politician, dropped everything to adopt, her daughter, and you realize that immediately, and you're like, damn, that's Ranger love right there.
Right.
I throw that in the positive. That's the first one for me.
Oh, I guess the biggest positive that I had for this movie was the fact that the leader of the movie was Billy. Was that David Yost? Despite the fact that all throughout the first 3 seasons, he's kind of glossed over as this super nerdy character who, from the very beginning of the show, could not fight. And then eventually they're like, okay, we'll let him learn how to fight, despite it only took about 20 episodes. Now he can flip and punch putties and hold his own. He's not putting his glasses away in his overalls. And then he just becomes this yoked out character, despite the fact that he's still a genius who created a car that could go from 0 to 3,000 in 2.8 seconds. I really enjoyed the fact that my favorite character in the history of the whole show, which I lost interest in Power Rangers at the very beginning because he was no longer on the show, that he was the main guy. I felt like at the beginning, I was a Jason and Tommy guy, but when they started to get more airtime, and especially Tommy started getting more airtime, and Tommy started becoming the super cool character that everybody wanted to be like, I started identifying with Billy because, of the way his character kind of changes throughout the series. I didn't feel like Jason David Frank or Tommy's character changed very much throughout the season. He was, in my opinion, still that same character, strong, good leadership qualities, but also completely absent-minded. I kind of identified more with Billy, and it was good to see that he was more of the lead in this show, that even despite the fact that from the first episode of the show to the last episode of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, he was the one constant throughout that whole series, but he only said it's morphin time 5 times.
Right. And
in a team setting, he only said it 5 times. I felt like when I saw him say it in the show, I was like, dang. And even better, when he was the centerpiece in the Megazord, he was the middle piece. I felt like that was cool because throughout the whole series, he was glossed around, much like some of the other characters, but Billy specifically, because he was the first to be there and he was the last there by the end of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers entity.
He, it just really just hit me as you were, how he was viewed and how he is now. He's basically Iron Man in this world. He has his own, division that builds weapons among flying cars, among other things. So to put him as if Billy's your guy, it reminds me of to do a quick turn to Dragon Ball Z. I was a Gohan guy, and this is his Cell Saga in the sense that now he's front and center. He's the reason things are getting done. And again, if Billy was your guy, I could totally see why this would, be a high point for you. And you mentioned earlier how the early actors had, they all had negative experiences. Some took it to more extreme, some dealt with it more and stayed on longer. That's very well documented. That's disheartening to know that these people that gave you this entertainment didn't have a great time while doing it. But the one positive I try to put on that is they have all reconciled to enough to work with them again.
Mhm.
So things must be pretty decent now. And Billy, even more documented on why he was let go as early as he was, or
Mhm.
rumored to be, whatever,
Mhm.
which would not fly today, flew
No.
back then.
No.
So for him to, I don't know that this is an apology necessarily, but it's like it's good to see him get that opportunity for sure.
I know for a fact that, I think it was the Megaforce Power Rangers. I think they were still under Saban. When they asked David Yost if he would be part of it, he said no because I just felt like he didn't want to work with Saban.
Right.
But then when it comes to these new guys working on it and the fact that he was more of a producer in it, I think that it speaks towards the fact that there's no bad blood amongst
Right.
amongst these actors. Like these actors are still cool with each other. They still do conventions with each other. They still do social media advertisements with each other. They're still support each other. I think
Luckily, I don't think there was very little to none at all bad blood, but amongst the actors, it tended to be the company versus the
mhm.
actors. I mean, there may have been little scuff ups that we
I
don't
think
need to
I
know
think
about,
with
but
I think with Austin St. John
yeah.
and Jason David Frank in like 2010 or something like that, they had a bit of drama, and I
But to me,
thought it was
that's
a
as simple as one guy was the lead. Now he's not the lead because this guy came in. Like that one was obvious to see.
mhm.
I don't think it was anything too much deeper than that.
When they were on set, I don't think there was an issue, but I remember someone did a podcast with Jason David Frank where Jason David Frank was like, "Look, Austin St. John, he's not a real martial artist and I'll kick his butt," or something like
Mhm.
that. Like I'm not trying to besmirch him because
Sure.
he's not with us anymore, but that's the only beef that I ever remembered there being. And
And
then
to
they
to
like squashed
timeline
it.
that,
They squashed it later on.
that may have been at the peak because like Jason David Frank did go on to like a mixed martial arts career, so that may have been at the peak of that where he's just like taking on the world and at the
Mhm,
height of his like confidence. And again, I
mhm,
wouldn't side with either or, but like in general, there's not a lot of issues with it, which is great to know. If two people did a show that you like, even on YouTube, let's say, like if two
mhm.
people that you watched countless hours of their content and you knew they weren't cool anymore, like that would suck for you as a
Yeah.
fan. So to
Mhm,
know that I'd say 90% of these men and women are cool with each other, that they've worked together and would enjoy seeing each other here, there, and at conventions, that's all you can ask for as a fan, I
mhm.
think.
And speaking of more positives, I think it's a real positive of the fact that they were at least able to bring back certain actors. They at least brought back enough actors to the point where they could fill a full team.
Right.
And let me just put it a little bit further because during my review, and it's going to be a future review of the show because it gets into the second season. We
Mm,
all know that that Tui Tran and Walter Emmanuel Jones and Austin St. John, Jason, Trini, and Zach, they
mhm,
left the show.
right.
But what you don't know is the fact that, or what you might know, what I knew while watching it was the fact that after they were gone, they tried to do everything that they could to, kind of mask the fact that these actors had already left and they weren't looping their voices with when they had the suits on. So
Yeah.
like they used voices and like Kia voices of people who weren't even them and didn't even sound like them at all.
Mhm.
And
It's
I think
obvious to see now. I don't know that I knew that as a kid, but you
oh
can if you go through watch it, you know exactly when that crap starts. Like
mhm.
you can pinpoint it like right there.
Actually when it starts they're not saying anything. They're completely silent. The ones that leave, they just go like this, like they're like a bunch of
Yeah,
like motions, but they're not saying anything. You could specifically hear Jason David Frank, David Yost, and Amy Jo Johnson, Tommy, Billy, and Kimberly, their voices out, but the other
sure.
ones you can't. Before I get into this, I know for a fact that Tui Tran was the first to leave.
Mhm.
And I know this because in one of the episodes, usually at the end of the episodes, all the Rangers are together. Well, at the end of this specific episode, every Ranger is there, every character is there, but her. So I personally believe my theory is that she left first.
Right.
But one thing I liked was the fact that despite the fact that Austin St. John wasn't there, he couldn't be there. because of his legal situation.
Mhm.
Jason David Frank was not there. He like retired. So he didn't want to be part of, he was doing his movie, and then he was going to be the end of Power Rangers for him.
Right.
And then Amy Jo Johnson, she didn't really give much of a reason why she wasn't there. She just
Mhm.
was like, I'm not there. But they actually used the voices of the actors. They used the real voices. They took clips from previous source material, because they actually used the voice of Thuy Tran when she was playing Trini back in the early 90s, because they can't use it now because she passed away a long time ago. They
Mhm.
actually used the real voices,
Mhm.
not like some generic like ooh voice, or
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm the Yellow Ranger, and then like some like Asian stereotype voice,
Yeah,
like,
that
Udon, what do we do?
right, which would put them in hot water if they attempted that now. But you mentioning Austin St. John reminded me of another positive I liked, and I'm looking at this from like the lens of like, what have these guys been up to? What has this world been like since I wasn't watching it anymore? And when they bring him to the command center, and it's obvious that he's like a firefighter now, and he's very upset that he can't eat his lunch. A part of me was happy to know that, like, oh, all right. So when this guy stopped being a Power Ranger, he still went on to do something that like help people. And I'd
Right.
like to think that like the few that you learn that like are now like in space or Lost Galaxy, like the ones that leave the Power Ranger fraternity, you like to think they all become like policemen and
Mm.
firefighters, and like they still go on to help people. And that's what you would want from your Power Rangers as a kid. So like that was, I thought that was a smart. They could have just, he could have been in street clothes with the Chinese food still, but I think it was a really smart move to make him a firefighter, in my opinion.
Yeah. And I think actually Austin St. John, the person,
Mhm.
he ended up becoming a firefighter
Well, that explains
in
that.
real
Yeah.
life.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think that it was great seeing the putties again. Like,
Yeah.
it's not Power Rangers without the putties.
Is it
Uh,
just me, not to cut you off, but
no,
because I rewatched it today because I wanted to before we did this. The putties got a big shot in the arm. Like they were not
mm,
the pushovers they used to be.
mm-mm.
And I don't know, that could be good and bad. I don't know where to put that, but there definitely weren't the pushovers they used to be. Used to
No,
knock them over and they would crumble,
yeah,
and they would beat them without even morphing like 7 out of 10 times.
no, yeah,
So if you're a
yeah.
putty fan, this was for you. So I don't know where you put that, but that was an
I, I
observation I made.
I think it's a positive because,
Okay.
again, they used to be pushovers, and you want some tension in your shows.
Yeah.
You don't want it so that, I mean, you don't want the actors to like outright die. I know that did happen in the movie, but like
Mhm.
you you also don't want the villains, like the henchmen, to be pushover. You want them to actually, show that they're powerful enough to beat them, but also show that they're tough to beat.